Vogel house, Tim?
Well, the hope would be, Jim, that we live in it. It's a very big property, of course, and it'll probably be very expensive to maintain. So I guess if Lynn's decided that it was going to gift the property to my brother and me outright, we'd need to sit down and figure out, well, okay, can we afford to live in it? And if so, can we maintain it? But that would be the goal, to live in it.
Given that it was the nation's, as it were, for so long, would you feel a responsibility if you gained ownership to somehow keep it the nation's as a sort of a museum or letting people go through the grounds? What would your attitude towards that be?
Well, I wouldn't keep it as a museum. My brother and I aren't quite that old yet. But I think what we do, because the Vogel family is well known in Lower Hutt, we'd certainly be open to, the city council approaching us perhaps for an open day or whatever. Maybe a charity could have some fundraising event there. Our minds would never be closed to something like that.
If your grandmother talked to you about how she wanted it, repatriated into the family, as it were, and the desirability of that, the fact that she put the SPCA and the Vogel Trust in her will, without mentioning the fate of the house and talking about eventualities, that's a problem, is it?
Well, I don't see why it is, because it should be remembered my brother and I are also, and our grandmother as well, we're stated as beneficiaries. I think it's also important to note that there were two donors here. That was my grandmother, but it was also my grandfather. Again, my brother and I are beneficiaries under our grandfather's will, but neither of the two charities are. So part of my argument would be as well, if the outcome of Vogel House is going to be decided on who are the beneficiaries, we probably have more standing than anyone else.
It's an interesting situation. Tim Vogel, thank you for coming on and explaining some of the circumstances from the Vogel's grandson's point of view.
It seems really unfair, doesn't it?
Well, it's complex. And I think the family are quoted as saying they don't really want the SPCA and the Vogel Trust put in this kind of position either. So it will be interesting what transpires. I was going to talk about Tokoroa, but I think I've only probably got time to talk. Oh, no, I'll talk about Tokoroa. We were discussing yesterday whether Auckland's just got too big, and instead of this densifying stalemate, we should, we were talking about China's policy of not letting cities get too big. I'm a recent graduate with overseas experience, texts Kat. I would love to buy a house or live outside Auckland. I believe in young people rejuvenating the smaller regions of New Zealand, but where would I find work in an inspirational and stimulating environment? It's not a housing shortage that's keeping us in Auckland. So, the tale of the vacant $400,000 doctor's job in Tokoroa has gone around the world. And the mayor of the South Waikato, Neil Sinclair, says young professionals need to consider Tokoroa as they won't find a safer, more caring community when they can live close to skiing and fishing. A new bus service running to the University of Waikato will help people train while being able to live in the town. How convincing is what the mayor is saying about Tokoroa as a destination?
It's a bit protesters too muchy, isn't it? Sort of seems like
a little bit
gliding over gang shootings and all the other things that go on there.
Well, the official South Waikato website says a low crime rate. Statistically, Tokoroa is a lot safer than Auckland or Rotorua. It says you're less likely to be burgled than the national average, and if you are, the police are more likely to catch the burglar.
That's because they dropped your stuff on the way to their place, which was right next door to yours.
The gang shootings, we're told, were an historical blip. So I haven't left you much time. What is stopping us, do you think? Well, I mean, why do the two of you live in cities? Can you sum that up in 25 words or less?
So I can go to openings.
Because my wife likes Christchurch. I love it here. So
you can go to openings and listen to interminable speeches.
Yeah, I get famous artists to sign my arm. Forget Tokoroa, move to Dunedin, for goodness sakes.
Hey, thank you both of you. Very nice to have you both on the panel again. David King has been on today with Lisa Scott. Thanks for your company too, everybody, and we're back tomorrow. Checkpoint with John Campbell now.
Kia ora everyone, welcome to Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm John Campbell, and on behalf of the Checkpoint team, thank you for joining us. Tonight, double murder accused Russell Tully removed from court after an outburst. Eyewitness accounts of the Fijian island of Koro from the first aid team to make it there. Keytruda, the immunotherapy drug used to fight advanced melanoma, funded in Australia, but not here. The people desperate for Pharmac to change their minds. Apple makes its case for saying no to the FBI, Auckland's unitary plan, and what last night's no vote really means. And Johnson & Johnson and their $72 million damages payout for talc-based baby powder. All that and more in the next 90 minutes, but we begin with Leilani Mamoisia with RNZ News.
Kia ora, good evening. The jury in the trial of double murder accused Russell Tully has been told he returned to Ashburton to die. The 49-year-old is charged with the murder of Peggy Noble and Lee Cleveland and the attempted murder of two of their colleagues at the Ashburton Work and Income Office in September 2014. Conan Young is in the High Court in Christchurch.
Today, evidence was heard from the Work and Income Regional Manager Shane Carter, who dealt directly with Mr Tully when he fell out with staff at the Ashburton office. He said Mr Tully made reference to his medical condition and said he'd come back to Ashburton to die. Under cross-examination, Mr Carter was asked if Mr Tully was angry at the system rather than a particular individual. He answered that that was a fair assessment. Earlier today, Mr Tully, who is defending himself, was ordered to leave court after an angry outburst. At the High Court in Christchurch, Conan Young.
The Foreign Minister Murray McCulley says a major infrastructure rebuild will be needed in Fiji to minimise the impact on the economy from Cyclone Winston. Mr McCulley says New Zealand and other aid donors stand ready to provide additional help. He says there have been both positives and negatives in the aftermath of Winston, with the capital Suva recovering rapidly, but outer districts and islands devastated. He says New Zealand has already made more than $3 million worth of aid available and has both aircraft and naval vessels helping. Mr McCulley says there is scope for further assistance.
As the assessments are made, you're looking at a very large bill, a big infrastructure rebuild, which the Fijian economy is going to need to have addressed pretty quickly. And obviously, with our partners and neighbours, we'll be looking to see what's an appropriate role for us there.
The Foreign Minister Murray McCulley. Meanwhile, prisoners have been deployed around the main island of Vitilevu to assist with the clean-up. The government says this will help in their rehabilitation. The family housing advocate is retracting criticism of a Housing New Zealand home as a health and safety risk. A family of 6 had been offered a 4-bedroom property in West Auckland nearly 5 years after they first applied for a state house. Earlier today, the family and their housing advocate described the home as damp and a risk to the children who have respiratory illnesses. The family said they were unhappy with its condition. However, their advocate, Ian Davies, now says he's been to see it and it's not as bad as he had thought.
Actually, the house looks okay. We can work with the issues that have still got to be fixed are not fundamental. They can be fixed. They can be rectified reasonably easy. And with this commitment from Housing New Zealand to ensure this house is dry as possible for this family, I think that's good. That's a good outcome.
Housing advocate Ian Davies. Housing New Zealand says the family are satisfied with the condition of the home and will sign the tenancy agreement tomorrow. The police are investigating the source of numerous hoax calls to schools throughout the country today. Yesterday, 2 schools evacuated students for a short time after threatening calls, but were given the all clear to return. The police say they have not established any actual threat and think the people responsible are ringing from overseas, even though the calls may display a New Zealand number. A jury in America has ordered the pharmaceutical giant Johnson & Johnson to pay $72 million to the family of a woman who claimed her death was linked to the use of the company's baby powder talc. Jackie Fox from Birmingham, Alabama, died of ovarian cancer last year, aged 62, having used the talc for decades for what's described as feminine hygiene purposes. Her family argued the firm knew of talc risks and failed to warn users. Some research suggests that when the cornstarch used in modern talcum powders is applied to the female genital area, particles can travel to the ovaries, irritate them and cause inflammation. Researchers say links with ovarian cancer are unproven. The chief executive of the British cancer charity Overcome, Louise Bain, says this is a potential risk.
We've advised for many years to avoid the use of talcum powder below the waist. Although talcum powder that was produced in the 70s contained nasties such as asbestos, the quality of the product is seen to improve, but nonetheless there's no need for it and we're advised not to use it.
Louise Bain of Overcome. To sport, and the New Zealand heavyweight boxer Joseph Parker is now one fight away from a shot at a world title. Parker's team confirmed today the 24-year-old will fight the Cameroon-born, France-based fighter Carlos Takam to find the new mandatory challenger for the IBF World Heavyweight title. Parker says securing the fight means he's closer than ever to his ultimate dream.
I remember when I was about 4 or 5 years old, I was at home and my dad was on his knees holding up his hands and I was punching his hands, and I always knew at that time I thought to myself, that one day I want to be the world champion. And this next fight is going to get us that much closer to achieving that goal and fulfilling that dream that I had when I was a young boy.
A venue's yet to be confirmed for the fight, which is expected to take place in May. The winner will get a mandatory shot at the IBF title by mid-January next year. The All Blacks' first five, Aaron Cruden, will make his long-awaited return for the Chiefs in their Super Rugby season opener. He's been named alongside 5 Chiefs debutants for Saturday night's clash with the Crusaders in Christchurch. And the World Cup winning All Black Liam Messam is in line to make his New Zealand Sevens return at next weekend's leg of the World Series in the United States. Messam has been named in the 14-man squad for the next 2 tournaments in Las Vegas and Canada. Messam hasn't played since he helped New Zealand win gold at the Commonwealth Games in India in 2010. And that's the news.
A home in Auckland.
We've got an urgent problem with housing affordability in the city, and by locking out the potential for new housing in existing suburbs, we're just going to have to sprawl from Whangarei to Hamilton.
Keeping the farm.
We're doing what we can to support the dairy industry with research and development. We're doing a huge amount for them, but farmers don't expect a bailout.
The end of an era.
Brendan will go down in cricket history as the most hostile batsman. That is his legacy.
Pitch Perfect. Guy and Espiner and Susie Ferguson. Morning Report, weekdays from 6.
Then on 9 to noon, the revolutionary ways data collected by social agencies is being used by academic researchers. And after 10, we take a spin through the 6,000-year history of the wheel. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon after Morning Report on RNZ National.
And Met Service forecast to midnight tomorrow for all of the North Island, also Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury. Fine with areas of cloud. Bull is mostly cloudy, a few showers from tomorrow afternoon. Westland occasional rain becoming heavy in southwestland tomorrow afternoon. Otago and Southland rains clearing overnight but scattered falls returning tomorrow afternoon. Fiordland rain with heavy falls easing to showers tomorrow evening. Chatham Islands cloudy periods. And I'll be back with news headlines at 5:30. It's now 5:08.
Thanks, Leilani. Just hearing from the newsroom that Dick Smith is reportedly going to close its New Zealand and Australian stores. We know, of course, that they went into receivership. Somewhere in the vicinity of 3,000 jobs are at stake. It looks like all of Dick Smith's 360-odd stores in Australia and New Zealand are going to close. We will confirm that the moment we can. Let's go to Christchurch. The double murder accused Russell Tully has been removed from court after a loud outburst there today. The 49-year-old is charged with the murder of Peggy Noble and Lee Cleveland and the attempted murder of 2 of their colleagues at the Ashburton Work and Income Office in September 2014. He also faces charges of setting a man trap, unlawful possession of a pump-action shotgun and a second shotgun and ammunition. Conan Young is covering the trial.
Russell Tully was absent from court yesterday for the first day of the hearing for reasons that have been suppressed by the judge. Today, Mr Tully, who is defending himself, appeared in court in a wheelchair, not in handcuffs, but flanked by 2 corrections officers. As soon as the proceedings began, he yelled over the judge, asking why he'd been brought into court.
I'll have to...
Morning, you excuse me to go and lie down because of my medical condition, right?
Mr.
Now you brought me in front of the council.
Quiet. If you're not,
to prove a point,
ask you to
say that I'm not fit to stand trial. That's what you're saying, isn't it?
Corrections officers, could you remove Mr Tully?
Following his outburst, Justice Cameron Mander directed the jury to put it out of their minds.
That very short little exchange or pantomime is completely irrelevant to your function as a jury. You must hearken to the evidence and concentrate on the evidence. Mr Tully is not present in the courtroom, but as I directed you firmly yesterday, that really is irrelevant to your task.
Once Mr Tully was removed from court, the trial continued and heard from the assistant manager at the Ashburton Winds office, Jamie Karudis, about an outburst from Mr Tully at the office almost a month before the shooting.
He ripped that piece of paper into small pieces and he threw it back at Linda at reception. This was the first time I'd seen him become quite aggressive, and he raised his voice, and it gave me a bit of a shock to start with, because up until then he'd been more quietly manipulative.
Russell Tully was angry he was going to have to pay back a grant from the Winds office for $500 to pay for a cabin at the local camping ground, food and medicine. Jamie Karudis said her office helped Mr Tully numerous times over the 2 months leading up to the shooting, but that the outburst over the grant was the final straw and led him being served with a trespass order from the office.
Pretty much every time we had an interaction with him resulted in him being unhappy or complaining and being demanding and manipulative to try and get what he wanted, sort of telling us what he is entitled to. Yeah, so they were never nice interactions.
Jamie Karudis wasn't in the office on the day of the shooting, but did see Mr Tully on the Sunday before it happened while she was out walking her dog in the local dog park.
As we walked out the gate to the right under the trees, I saw Mr Tully lying there, sort of looked like he was in sort of maybe a sleeping bag.
Evidence was also heard from the Winds regional manager Shane Carter, who dealt directly with Mr Tully when he fell out with staff at the Ashburton office.
He was very adamant that he wanted a Housing New Zealand property. He'd made reference to his medical condition and had said that he'd come back to Ashburton to die and wanted a state house.
Shane Carter said since there were no state houses available in Ashburton, he gave Mr Tully the option of moving into a home in either Christchurch or Timaru, but that he was determined to remain in Ashburton. Mr Tully is defending himself, but 2 lawyers have been appointed to assist him in the court. Under cross-examination by one of them, Mr Carter was asked if Mr Tully was angry at the system rather than a particular individual. He answered that this was a fair assessment. At the High Court in Christchurch for Checkpoint, Conan Young.
30 minutes past 5 on Checkpoint. We have 3 eyewitness accounts of what's going on in Fiji on the programme tonight. The death toll from Cyclone Winstone stands at 42, including 3 children. Joining us now via Skype video from Ba'an, Fiji, is Alice Clements from UNICEF. Alice, welcome. Where are you exactly?
I'm in Ba on the island of Vetilevu, and I'm standing outside AKP Primary School. I've got some new friends here with me. I'm not sure if you can see them, but probably in the background you can see the remains of the primary school. The entire top floor has been pretty much destroyed, and this is one of around about 68 schools confirmed so far to have been badly damaged.
So that school is simply not usable for the time being?
For the time being, it's actually housing large numbers of displaced families and children whose own homes have been partially or completely destroyed. All of the children standing here with me at the moment are without homes. So this school, with many of them 5 or 6 or even 9 to a room, 9 families to a room that is, are sheltering here with no power during the nights.
So there's no power, there's 5 or 6 families to a room, and obviously all the people who are using those facilities, such as they are homeless.
That's correct.
Alice, can you show us those? Can you just swing that camera around? Obviously, while you do it, this is happening on radio as well. But there are lots and lots of children there, and they have all come from families who've lost their homes. What sort of psychological state are these kids in?
Well, in Fiji, a smile is pretty much a permanent feature. So these kids are amazing. They're always so welcoming, and they're always so, superficially very happy at the best of times. But there's an awful lot of pain that's being hidden behind these smiles, John. Where these kids don't have a home anymore. They don't have their favorite possessions or toys anymore. They don't have their school supplies necessarily. And the future is very uncertain at this point in time.
Yeah, Alex, we're going to talk to Alex Perrottet about this later. But of course, all sorts of things have been lost, including cash crops like sugar. Are you able to report on the situation with that? Is the horticultural industry just been wiped out in many places?
I drove yesterday for about 6.5 hours across some of the worst affected parts of Viti Levu Island. And in places, it just looked like a bushfire had been through. All of the trees are brown. There's no foliage left whatsoever. And in fact, the winds have been so strong that the bark has been scoured off the trees in many places. The affected parts of Fiji are turning brown, and this is simply not right for this country. This is a beautiful tropical country.
Alice Clements, thank you so much. Alice Clements, who's with children at a school in the province of Ba. Now, as Alice said, that school has now been converted into temporary housing. The top roof has gone, the roof on the top level has gone. People are living in classrooms on the bottom level. 5 families per class, Alice was saying. Since the cyclone hit on Saturday, there's been great concern too about outer islands in the path of Winston, particularly Koru. Today, at last, a report from someone who has been there. Joseph Hing is also with UNICEF. Like Alice, he sent us photos and this description of what he saw.
So we arrived around 7 o'clock to Coral Island yesterday. The scene was pretty... We didn't see the island that clearly, but as we sailed closer, we started to smell the carcasses of dead livestock that were floating past the ships. When we smelled those, we knew that this disaster was really, really, really bad. As the morning mist started to clear, we started to see the island much more clearer. It looked like someone took a torch and just burnt from one side to the other. There's nothing. All you could see was just brown trees and just bare sand. Our ship detoured to Nassau village because we were told that was the most affected village in Coral. So we sailed towards that village, and the devastation was unbelievable. It docked, say, 200 meters away from the village because we couldn't go any closer. So everyone was told to go as a group in the small boats that were provided by the government. So I was the second group to go. When we got on, we prepared ourselves to see the worst because we could see from the ship like everything was completely gone. So we got into our ship and then we traveled closer to the village. As we got closer, the children started to run towards us because they knew we were bringing supplies. So they ran towards us. They pulled our boats in, and we got off. And the first thing, this kid, when I got off, this kid helped me off the ship, and then the first thing he said was, "It looks really bad, eh?" So I was like, "Yeah." The kid was he looked like he was around 10 or 9 years old. So I followed him to the village. He took me up. The coastal area was completely gone. Yeah, all there were just broken trees and all this debris just lying area. There were tins from houses that were dragged back out to sea after the storm surge. So we walked into the village. The first thing we passed was the hall, the meeting hall. And this is where we set up the distribution area with all our supplies and stuff.
An eyewitness account from Joseph Hing. He is from UNICEF as he arrived on Koro Island in Fiji. Our reporter Alex Perrottet from RNZ International has been travelling around Fiji since the weekend. He's been looking at the damage to crops. This is huge. And it will be very, very costly to that country at a time when they desperately don't need it. We will speak to Alex live from Fiji after 6 o'clock. We want to update a story that is breaking. The receivers of electronics chain Dick Smith have announced all standalone stores in New Zealand and Australia will close. They say 62 stores in New Zealand and 301 stores in Australia will close over the next 8 weeks. Receiver James Stewart says around 430 staff will be impacted in New Zealand. Mr. Stewart says while we received a significant number of expressions of interest from local and overseas parties, unfortunately the sales process has not resulted in any acceptable offers for the group as a whole or for Australia or New Zealand as standalone businesses. The offers were either significantly below liquidation values or highly conditional or both. So Dick Smith is to close and 430 staff will be impacted. Boy, that word may be an understatement. The time is 21 minutes past 5. Where to now for Auckland Council's failed proposal to build more houses on less land in some parts of the city. Last night, councillors voted to dump last-minute changes to the city's unitary plan, which would have allowed increased housing density to accommodate for a projected population boom. The vote means the proposal won't be part of the case Auckland Council takes to the panel considering the city's blueprint for the next few decades, but it also means the Auckland Council could be unrepresented in all of this. The debate is driving an intergenerational divide, some people are saying, between property owners wanting to protect their biggest asset and those who say intensification is the only way they will ever be able to afford to buy a house in Auckland. Joining me now in the studios, financial analyst Bernard Hickey from The Hive, who was at the meeting last night. Bernard, welcome. I have a sense that you were taken aback by the behaviour in the meeting last night. Can you describe it for us?
Yeah, I was surprised at how the residents from the east of Auckland shouted down the young people who were simply arguing that they wanted to be part of Auckland, to be able to get onto the property ladder and to have some affordable housing. But they weren't allowed to say their piece in quiet. They were shouted down by a largely old and very angry audience in the room.
Because as I read the word intergenerational in the intro, I slightly balked from it. I thought, is it simply that polarised? But did you have a sense that that was the case? The fors and against divided on age lines?
Yeah, we really saw the difference between the old Auckland, who lived in houses on sections in those leafy suburbs on the isthmus, versus the new Auckland. Young people, often from Pacifica, Māori and Asian backgrounds, who simply want to get onto the ladder to build their own families, albeit in an apartment, not on a section. And that's what this debate is about. Should Auckland be allowed to grow and handle the 1 million people that are going to come over the next 30 years? And how does the city organise itself to allow those apartments to be built? And a group of people last night literally shouted down the young people who are arguing for this.
I want to take the point that Richard Burton makes from Auckland 2040, so opposition obviously. Richard made the point this morning on Morning Report that there are plenty of other areas already zoned for high-density housing. He uses the example of Takapuna, of course, where high-density apartments and townhouses can go already. He says last night's decision only concerns the very small amount of land which was rezoned under the late changes, which is largely suburban and no good for apartments anyway.
Well, that's what he says. But the arguments that the independent hearings panel and the planners at the Auckland Council put was that this set of maps that they put forward in December was the best way to reach the targets that Auckland needs. Remember, Auckland needs to find places for 280,000 extra houses or dwelling units, including apartments, in the next 30 years, somewhere within the old boundaries of Auckland Council. And that's been agreed by the Council and by the Independent Hearings Panel, and actually, by the way, by the government. So Housing New Zealand Corp, which is headed by Bill English, and Nick Smith have made referrals. They've asked the Independent Hearings Panel to make Auckland more dense, to intensify it so it can handle these people. Auckland needs 280,000 houses. The old plan, the one that the council had just reverted to, only really allows 80,000 houses. So they're 200,000 houses short. And that's according to the Independent Hearings Panel's own modelers, the experts, the people, remember, who look at this stuff. They've gone through the models, they've looked at what's economically viable, and they say those old maps, the ones the council's just gone back to, will only come up with 80,000 houses. Auckland is now going to be 200,000 houses short over the next 30 years. And as Bill English said today, this imposes a cost on the rest of New Zealand. Higher interest rates than need to be the case, higher costs in rent subsidies, about $2 billion a year. And then, of course, there's the inequality.
And the rent subsidies are going from the government to landlords.
That's right. He's pointed out.
Actually, that's not often discussed. Can you say that figure again?
Yeah. So $2 billion is what New Zealand taxpayers pay to landlords, and to be fair, to make sure that people can stay in Housing New Zealand houses or other social housing. $2 billion that taxpayers in Gore or Gisborne or whoever pay, and it's mostly going into Auckland.
Okay, so what is going to be the outcome of the council's decision last night?
Well, the shocking thing now is that it's going to be very difficult for the councillors, and particularly the 13 who voted down the Dean's plan, to then agree to an independent hearings panel recommendation in July or August. August is when the vote's likely to happen. Remember, that'll be 6 weeks before the council elections. And that's the problem here. The precedent was set last night to stop a unitary plan which would allow these new houses to be built. And that's a cost that's going to be borne by all of New Zealand for decades to come, not to mention the generations who don't have a vote in this election, or the people who already live here and choose not to vote. And that was something that Bill English pointed out today, and which is pointed out by the government in its submissions to the Independent Hearings Panel.
Bernard Hickey, financial analyst from The Hive. Thank you so much for joining us, Bernard. The time on Checkpoint is 5:26. Would love your feedback on what Bernard was saying and on what happened last night. And if you're out of Auckland and you are interested, the unitary plan and what's happening is actually available on the internet. Coming up next, Apple CEO Tim Cook on the unlocking of cell phones and their opposition to the FBI's plans to do so in one particular case. And later in the program, melanoma patients Lisa Renwick and Jeffrey Patterson, both stage 4, are in the studio. They're heading to Parliament next week with a petition calling for the government to approve funding for Keytruda, Farm Act to approve funding for Keytruda. It's funded in Australia and the UK, not here. It does seem to be achieving impressive results in the treatment of advanced melanoma. We'd love to hear from you in any way you choose. You can tweet us, at Checkpoint RNZ, Facebook, the same address. You can text us on 2101, or you can email us, checkpoint@radionz.co.nz. Leilani standing by with the latest headlines. But let's go quickly to this fascinating case, Apple versus the FBI. In an exclusive interview with ABC America, Apple CEO Tim Cook has spoken out about breaking into an iPhone belonging to one of the San Bernardino gunmen. This report comes from Reuters. And in it, Mr. Cook says, well, that would set a dangerous precedent.
In an interview on ABC News World News Tonight with David Muir, Apple CEO Tim Cook reiterates his company's stance on unlocking an iPhone belonging to one of the San Bernardino shooters.
But this case is not about one phone. This case is about the future. What is at stake here is, can the government compel Apple to write software that we believe would make hundreds of millions of customers vulnerable around the world, including the U.S.? The only way we know would be to write a piece of software that we view as sort of the software equivalent of cancer. We think it's bad news to write. We would never write it. We have never written it. And that is what is at stake here. If we knew a way to get the information on the phone that we haven't already given, if we knew a way to do this that would not expose hundreds of millions of other people to issues, we would obviously do it.
Tim Cook fighting his corner on behalf of Apple. A high-powered group set up to look into the problem of feral cats wants them all gone in a decade. Members of the National Cat Management Strategy Group include the SPCA, Local Government New Zealand, and Gareth Morgan's foundation. But making New Zealand feral feline free has got some people's claws out. I apologise for that. Maya Bari reports.
In a draft document, the group says it wants cats humanely managed in a way that protects their welfare and the country's unique environment by 2025. The Morgan Foundation spokesperson, Jeff Simmons, says cats kill birds, lizards and other native wildlife, and that's what the group is trying to stop.
We all agree on what we're trying to achieve, which is making sure that all cats are, loved pets and looked after well, and that we minimise the Australian feral cat population and ensure that the cats that are owned have the least possible impact on their environment.
New Zealand has at least 2.5 million feral cats. The group's aim is to promote responsible cat ownership, environmental protection and humane cat management. Craig Dunn from the animal rights charity Poor Justice wants more research into what getting rid of the feral felines would mean.
I think that's a really big concern. You've got to take a lot of factors into consideration around it, including the environment of when you take out a predator and where do rats go? Is it worse to have more rats or more cats? So there's a lot of information that needs to come out around it.
The anti-animal exploitation group SAFE says everyone needs to do their bit. Hans Craig says desexing domestic cats is critical to solving the issue and should be a focus of the strategy.
So I think there will be some good things, and I'm sure some groups will be advocating the destruction of feral cats in all sorts of inhumane ways. But I hope that common sense will prevail and that prevention is going to be the key thing here.
But the Cat Management Strategy Group says it has no clear idea how it would achieve its goals yet. Brendan Bullen from the Veterinary Association, which is part of the group, says it's still consulting on its long-term strategy.
Yeah, well, these are interesting questions, and this is why it's certainly not a simple answer to how we move forward. So that's why we're starting at this upper level. This is what we want to achieve, and then we're going to go out to this wide group of people that all have different skills and different knowledge and come together to find the best way forward.
Brendan Bullen says those consultations will help them reach their feral feline-free goal by 2025. For Checkpoint, Maya Burry.
Coming up in the next half hour, the lawyer for Jacqueline Fox, an American woman who died from ovarian cancer, calls for Johnson & Johnson's talcum powder products to be removed from shelves. And later in Checkpoint, the petitioners fighting for a melanoma drug to be publicly funded. But first, here's Leilani Mamoisia with the headlines.
Electronics retailer Dick Smith is to close after the receiver failed to find a buyer. The company, which has about 60 stores and 430 staff in New Zealand, had been struggling with too much stock and falling demand when the banks pulled the plug on its financing arrangements earlier this year. The stores are expected to close over the next 8 weeks. The jury in the trial of double murder accused Russell Tully has been told he returned to Ashburton to die. The 49-year-old is charged with the murders of 2 staff and the attempted murder of 2 of their colleagues at the Ashburton Work and Income Office in September 2014. Today in the High Court in Christchurch, evidence was heard from the regional manager, Shane Carter, who dealt directly with Mr Tully when he fell out with staff at the office. He said Mr Tully made reference to his medical condition and said he'd come back to Ashburton to die. The Foreign Minister, Murray McCully, says a major infrastructure rebuild will be needed in Fiji to minimise the impact on the economy of Cyclone Winston. Mr McCully says New Zealand and other aid donors stand ready to provide additional help. An agency running anti-violence programs says a new report revealing gaps in services should push the government to make urgent changes to stop abuse and deaths. The police are investigating the source of numerous hoax calls, probably from overseas, to schools throughout the country today. State Highway 1 in North Otago is closed at Hampton, south of Oamaru, after a collision that left a motorcyclist dead. The transport agency says it should reopen about 7 this evening. There are no detours. And it's 26 to 6.
Thanks, Leilani. Very timely to have business news right now because the breaking news of this evening is, of course, this announcement about Dick Smith. Let's talk to Giles Beckford, our business editor. Giles, this is big news. Was it wholly unexpected, do you think?
No, not at all, John. I think really the surprise is that it's taken them so long to really read the last rights over Dick Smith. They clearly couldn't find anybody who was willing to stump up any money of any consequence for this. I expect, just looking at their statement, they said the offers were either significantly below liquidation values or highly conditional or both. Basically, people wanted a store here, a store there. They wanted it at bargain basement prices. Nobody wanted 400 stores in Australia and New Zealand. And if you were one of the big players like JB Hi-Fi or here in New Zealand, Noel Leeming, why would you want to buy them? You're just going to take their market share anyway and just let them die. And that's precisely what's happened.
Gosh, Charles, this is all being sprung on us at a rate of knots, and I'm fascinated by the floats. And I guess we just don't have the information about this. But Dick Smith, what was floated? Anyway, this is a company that has lost value so fast. And it just seems extraordinary to me that it should be able to happen so quickly.
Well, it came from that period of restructuring and ownership by the private equity group Archers. And they essentially, as one blogger from a fund management company put it, they took a $10 million piece of mutton and dressed it up and sold it as a $520 million piece of lamb.
Yeah, Giles, at this stage, you actually want to say, I hope they can sleep at night, those people, because it wasn't worth $520 million or anywhere near it, was it?
They put around somewhere in the region of $20 million of the fund's own money into the restructuring by a range of various mechanisms, such as the revaluation of the stock, the running down of stock levels, the cheap refinancing or the lack of refinancing, and then the premium that they were asking for the shares when they floated it. Archers did very well out of it. Nothing they did was illegal. Nothing that they did was, well, some would say that it was unethical, but for many people it was just straight business practices, and they reaped the rewards, and their shareholders reaped the rewards. The people who have paid are the customers who have been left out of pocket, are the workers who are losing their jobs and will lose some entitlements and will have to go and look for jobs, and the broader consuming public.
Yeah, that Forager Funds Management thing you're talking about calls it the greatest private equity heist of all time. Boy, there's some competition for that title. Giles, Air New Zealand, let's talk about their result today.
Well, it was a cracker, John. We had tourism numbers, and you always knew that, as we said earlier in the week, it was going to be a good result, and it would mirror what happened with Qantas, who made $1 billion. Well, Air New Zealand, $338 million profit, and that was in line with those estimates that we gave earlier in the week. The tourism numbers that came out today showed that we had 3.2 million visitors to New Zealand last year. Air New Zealand carries 4 out of every 10 of those passengers, 40% of them. Of course, they're going to cream it, and with fuel prices falling by nearly half over the past year, they were quids in. Their forecast is for $800 million plus pre-tax earnings full year. An analyst I've spoken to this afternoon says they're being conservative with that estimate. They're doing well, and they'll continue to make hay for the next couple of years at least.
Giles, just quickly, the markets, how did they close today?
Top 50 index down 5.6225. The New Zealand dollar nice and steady, 66.5 US, 92.7 Australian.
Giles Beckford, our business editor, who got to grips with all of that Dick Smith stuff in about half an hour. We really appreciate it. 5:38. Johnson & Johnson has been ordered to pay $72 million in damages to the family of a woman whose death from cancer has been linked to talc-based baby powder. Jacqueline Fox claims she used baby powder and shower to shower for feminine hygiene for more than 35 years before being diagnosed 3 years ago with ovarian cancer. She died in October. Johnson & Johnson faces claims that in an effort to boost sales, it failed for decades to warn consumers that its talc-based products could cause cancer. About 1,000 cases have been filed in the US state of Missouri, another 200 in New Jersey. Mrs. Fox lawyer Jerry Beasley says the powder should be pulled from shelves.
This was a company that had shown no concern, no remorse, who absolutely had no concern for the people that were dying. Families died, families had loved ones die, buried them, had no idea why they got ovarian cancer. They knew as far back as 1979 the association between talc and ovarian cancer. They knew that 1,500 women were dying each year from ovarian cancer caused or indirectly contributed to by talc, and continued to sell made a conscious decision not to warn. They manipulated the media. They manipulated the scientific community. They manipulated the governmental agencies. But Johnson & Johnson never knew that these documents would ever be seen by anybody, and this jury saw them. I would challenge them to put these documents out on their website and let the public see these documents and let public opinion decide. It should be pulled from the market. In fact, when you consider the fact that the mining company put on its product in 2006 a warning that said this product is possibly carcinogenic, and yet Johnson & Johnson did not pass that on to the consumers. This was in the year 2006. And this trial was in 2016?
That's the lawyer acting in this case. A Johnson & Johnson spokeswoman told Reuters, "We have no higher responsibility than the health and safety of consumers, and we are disappointed with the outcome of the trial. We sympathise with the plaintiff's family, but firmly believe the safety of cosmetic talc is supported by decades of scientific evidence." Checkpoint asked Johnson & Johnson's New Zealand arm what the ruling means for this country. A spokesperson couldn't confirm if the products used in the US were the same as those used here, but says the testing procedures are the same. They say the talc used in all its products is of the highest quality and is tested for compliance. It's 5:41. On Tuesday of next week, a petition will be presented on the steps of Parliament calling for a drug to be funded through Pharmac. The drug is best known by its name Keytruda, and it's a form of immunotherapy, new drugs that provoke the body's own immune system into identifying and attacking cancer cells rather than attacking the cancer cells itself. So it gets the immune system to do the work. Keytruda is expensive. The drug itself costs over $10,000 a month. That's just for the drug, and Pharmac has declined to fund it. The petition calls for the decision to be reversed so it can be used to fight advanced melanoma. Now, while it's early days in the drug's life, Chris Jackson, an oncologist and medical director of the Cancer Society of New Zealand, has said it's like nothing we've ever seen before. In Australia and the UK, Keytruda is publicly funded. I spoke to two people with stage 4 melanoma about this, the fight for funding. Lisa Renwick, a 47-year-old teacher who's organised the petition being presented on the steps of Parliament next Tuesday, and Jeff Patterson, a 22-year-old master's student and an architect who's also diagnosed with stage 4 melanoma. They're both desperate Jeff is desperately fundraising to get money for Keytruda. I began by asking Lisa Renwick about her diagnosis.
I did have a melanoma removed from my back in 2010, but it was extremely shallow, like less than a millimetre. So when I started to feel a little ill back in May of last year, I just thought I'd picked up a tummy bug. Within a couple of days, I was in hospital. My abdomen swelled to the point that I looked like I was in the 3rd trimester of pregnancy because it was filling with fluid. I didn't know what was wrong with me. And they took some tests, did some scans, took a biopsy, and a few days after that came in and said, "We're really sorry, but you have stage 4 metastatic melanoma. There's absolutely nothing we can do for you, and you'll probably be dead within a few weeks."
They said it to you that bluntly, absolutely.
They were, to be fair, they were calm, but they had a message to deliver.
And that was that you had a few weeks to live.
Yes.
And so that was more than half a year ago. In fact, 9 months ago, 8 months?
I went into hospital on Mother's Day, so it was May 10th. I remember it perfectly. And as I say, I was given a few weeks after that. And I'd been at work. I walked away from work. I left all my stuff on my desk. I never went back.
Now, the difficult thing about doing these interviews is that you have to tread a fine line between something that sounds like an advertorial, because we're not here to promote this drug, but why are you alive? Why are you alive when you were told that you would be dead months ago?
Well, actually, stepping away from the drug for a moment, I'm alive because of my family, because of my husband, and because of his advocacy. Because the people at the public hospital told me there was absolutely nothing they could do for me, but he didn't accept that. So he was the one who sought out information. He was the one who rang the private clinic after being told to by the people at the public hospital. He was the one who, when I was discharged from hospital, threw me in the car and drove me to Auckland, even though I was sick. He was the one who demanded that they test my cancer for the BRAF gene, and he was the one who walked to the oncologist with a cheque for $12,000 for the drugs. That's why I'm still alive.
$12,000 gets you drugs for how long?
A month. But we were lucky, you see, because when he went in with that cheque for $12,000, they told him that that first drug, the gene therapy drug, that we'd actually got in on the compassionate consideration program.
Right, now this is a beginner's guide, and Jeff, who is sitting beside me for people listening on the radio who can't see this, we're going to talk to you in a moment, Jeff, but I'm going to stick with Lisa because I want to hear your story. This is a beginner's guide. So the first drug you used kind of whacks the cancer but doesn't beat it for good, is that?
In my case, it whacked the cancer hugely. My family and my friends kept me alive for the time it took for the drug to start working. They rostered themselves on and they fed me once an hour a spoonful of food, which, if you can imagine how quickly I got sick, that was all I could take. And within probably a week of taking that drug, I was able to get out of bed.
Name the drug for me.
Dabrafenib.
And what do you call it, you two? Because you shorten it, don't you? Call it
BRAF.
BRAF, okay. Can we call it BRAF from now on because I can't remember how to even say the other thing. Say it again, Lisa.
Dabrafenib.
Okay. So after dabrafenib, you went to Keytruda, and that's what you're on now?
Yes, I took dabrafenib for 5 months. It was a really hard decision to stop taking it and to move on to Keytruda or pembrolizumab because it had worked so well for me, because it had saved me, because it had sent me into full remission, but I knew that it was going to stop working.
So hold on a sec. You were told you were going to die, and then you had full remission.
Oh, I was told I was going to die in May, and in August I had a scan and was told that there was no sign of the cancer, that I'd gone into full remission, that it was all gone.
And that drug is not publicly funded in New Zealand.
There is no publicly funded effective treatment for melanoma in New Zealand. There is no option but to go private if you want to live. The only thing offered by the public hospitals is palliative care. I got a lot of morphine from the public hospital, but no treatment.
Jeff, can I come to you? How old are you?
22 years old.
And you are in the position that Lisa was describing. It's a blunt conversation to have with a 22-year-old.
Of course.
But you've been told you have stage 4 melanoma, it's metastasised, and you're in real trouble.
Yes, of course. And to give me a fighting chance, I need these drugs to be funded.
So you are now taking this BRAF as well.
Mm-hmm.
How are you paying for that?
At the moment, I'm fundraising on Give a Little. I've been doing it on social media, Facebook, Instagram, whatever can help.
Old-fashioned community stuff, galas,
dinners,
also,
galas, dinners, concerts.
And how much does it cost? How much does a course cost?
For the BRAFs that I'm on at the moment, it is $10,000 every month.
Forgive me, because this is an awful conversation to have with a 22-year-old, but I think it's important that we're upfront about this. Were you told you were terminally ill? Or that it was...
They never used the word terminal, but stage 4 I knew. That's
inoperable.
What that meant. Inoperable. They told I had inoperable tumours in my lungs.
And then you had this drug, and what are those inoperable tumours in your lungs like now?
Gone. Within 2 weeks, they were gone.
And Lisa, yours are gone?
Yes.
And then, so that is an extraordinary short-term blow to your cancer. And then the long-term strategy, you think, is to use Keytruda, right?
Yes.
But Keytruda is extraordinarily expensive and is also not funded by Pharmac.
Correct.
And so, Lisa, you are now taking this petition down to Wellington to say, hey, fund this drug.
That's right, because even though I don't like parting with the money, at least I can afford to pay. At least I'm being treated. But every day I meet people like Jeff who look at me and say, but how are you getting this drug? And I have to say to them, well, I'm paying.
How much does it cost you?
It's costing us $8,500 every 3 weeks.
Wow. And Jeff, you don't have that, do you? You're 22-year-old, large
Not even
family.
out of uni yet.
No. And your
Yeah.
wonderful mum who was sitting through there and who was supporting you, she doesn't have that money.
No.
If you were in Australia, if you were exactly the same in every respect, same illness, same man, same everything, and you lived in Brisbane or Sydney or Melbourne or wherever, Toowoomba, would you be having to pay for this drug?
No.
You'd get it for free.
Yes.
Canada, Britain, free.
Free.
So why isn't it funded in New Zealand?
Oh, there's only one reason, and it's money. It's funding. Pharmac is not funded to buy these drugs. It's a political decision. It's a governmental decision.
It's the cake decision, and it's the classic unsentimental cake decision, and that is you have a health budget and you have to cut it up and distribute it, and you have to leave some stuff out. Why do you think they shouldn't leave Keytruda out?
Because at the moment, melanoma patients are not getting any share of that cake.
And we have the highest rate of melanoma in the world.
Exactly. I mean, in the past, there was an excuse. There was no treatment. But now there is. That medicine is sitting on the shelf here in New Zealand, and the only people who are allowed to use it, who have access to it, are the people who can pay for it. Yet we say that we have a public health system, and that's wrong. That's wrong.
What other treatment is available for you as stage 4 melanoma patients with metastasized cancers?
My understanding is that there is chemotherapy that is effective in possibly 3 to 5% of cases.
I think maybe 5 to 10, if that.
Very low.
My understanding is the official figures are a little higher, according to the oncologists.
Right.
And it's old. I mean, it's old. They don't even use it overseas anymore.
So other than chemotherapy and palliative care, morphine, as you said before, Lisa, that's it.
And the chemotherapy has been described to me as being more or less palliative anyway. It's not expected to cure people. The oncologists know it doesn't cure people.
So Jeff, you had how many tumours in your lungs? 4.
4 tumours, yeah.
And you were told they were inoperable.
Yes.
You took, say the name of it.
The BRAF.
The BRAF.
The BRAFNib, yeah.
Yeah, and the tumours are gone.
Yes.
In order for them to stay gone, you now want to move on to Keytruda, right?
Yes. Yeah, eventually.
And you're going to have to pay for it yourself.
Yes. It's ridiculous.
So what would you say to Pharmac, you two? What would you say to Pharmac, Jeff?
I'd say you called it a low priority. Why don't you try wear my shoes? See what priority you'll call it then.
Lisa?
I would say that while you're making your commercial decisions, while you're negotiating with those 2 drug companies, both of whom have competing drugs, to get the best price you can, while you're waiting for the drugs to go to the generic stage, someone is dying every single day. And how do you cost that out? How much is that costing the country? And where does that come in your calculations?
That's Lisa Renwick and Jeff Patterson, who both have stage 4 melanoma cancer, and they are, well, Lisa is behind the petition that is going to Parliament on Tuesday to ask for it to be publicly funded. Keytruda, we invited Health Minister Jonathan Coleman onto the program to respond to them. He said he was unavailable tonight or tomorrow night. That's fine, we said. The petition is being presented on Tuesday, so could you talk to us on Monday night? We're waiting to hear if the minister's available. Pharmac was unavailable tonight, but they've contacted us to say they will be on the program tomorrow night to respond. If you're paying for Keytruda, or if you have stage 4 melanoma and would like Keytruda, we would really like to hear from you. You can email us, checkpoint@radionz.co.nz, or text us on 2101. Feedback coming in already. Judith asks, so if that drug is made available, who will miss out on something already funded? Will many die or just have unpleasant or painful lives? Other feedback on other subjects. John, if the FBI want to gain access to that mobile phone, they should ask the ex-staff of the News of the World to help them. Says Nigel Cairns, just depressingly true. Nigel, 2/3 of New Zealand must be tired about hearing about Auckland housing. Is there no real news? Says Jeffrey. Yeah, Jeffrey, it's funny, that one. Isn't it real news because it comes from Auckland? And I say that as a Wellingtonian. I don't know. if it's from Auckland, is it axiomatically not real news? And we lived in East Auckland, says James, who's now in Wanaka. It's a hotbed for NIMBYs. Any plans for anything other than posh malls there gets shouted down. It's basically a big, cosy right-wing bunker by the sea, says James, who's clearly pleased he lives in Wanaka. Now, OK, let's talk sport. This is quite an extraordinary development. The New Zealand heavyweight boxer Joseph Parker is now one fight away from a shot at a world title. Parker's team confirmed that today the 24-year-old will do battle with Cameroon-born France-based fighter, Carlos Takam, to find the new mandatory challenger for the IBF World Heavyweight title. Sports reporter Joe Porter is in our Wellington studio now. Joe, boxing is so full of the proverbial, isn't it? And it constantly takes a donkey and tells us it's far lap. But this really is a big deal, isn't it?
Oh, certainly. I mean, Joseph Parker, it's fair to say that in the past he probably hasn't fought the most illustrious opponents. Some would go so far as to call them bums. This is a real step up in an opponent for Joseph Parker. This is a huge step up. This guy is ranked in the top 6 of all the sanctioning bodies around the world. He's only had 2 losses in a career that spanned, I believe, 33 wins, and those 2 losses were to guys ranked higher than him currently in those sanctioning body rankings. This is a real test for Joseph Parker, and like his trainer Kevin Barry said, this is going to be the test of how far Joseph Parker has come in these 3 years. We know he's made a rapid rise through the ranks, but this will really set the benchmark for whether or not he gets included in that list of potential great heavyweights that seem to be emerging at this time.
Yeah. So to explain why this is important, the winner of this gets a mandatory challenge.
That's right. So the winner of this fight gets a mandatory title challenge for the IBF World Heavyweight title. Now, American Charles Martin and Britain's Anthony Joshua, another 2 upstart young heavyweights, are fighting for that title in April. Whoever wins that bout will, of course, become the world champion. They will then take on the winner of the Joseph Parker-Takam fight in a mandatory title challenge before mid-January 2017. It has to happen before then. So the winner of this Parker fight gets a mandatory world title shot before this time next year.
Where will this fight be?
Well, I guess JUCO events, Parker's promoters will be going through the negotiations with Takam's camp. They're hoping to have the bout scheduled for May in New Zealand, probably Auckland, Christchurch or Invercargill, most likely the first 2, Auckland or Christchurch. So I'm thinking Christchurch in May is what JUCO want. Whether or not Takam's camp come on board, they probably should. It seems like there's more money to be made from this fight in New Zealand, so it looks like it's going to be New Zealand in May, probably Christchurch.
OK, and very quickly, I know you've said this, but what do we know about this guy, Takam? Obviously, he's got a fairly good record.
Yes.
Yeah, good fighter?
Yeah, he is. He's powerful, he's strong. He's probably the strongest guy Parker has yet to come up against, as well as being the most convincing boxer in terms of his record. He's had 33 wins, 25 by knockout in his professional career, and only 2 losses to, like I said, guys who are ranked in the top 5 of every sanctioning body in the world. He's 35 years old, he's been around, he's seen it, he's done it. He hasn't come from a background where he's been pushed by money into the spotlight, so he's earned the right to be where he is. And this is going to be a real serious test for Parker. I've been watching some clips of this guy fight today. He's got a vicious left hand. He holds his guard low. He's quite a surprising, crafty guy. He's shorter than Parker with a little bit of less reach, but boy, he can move quick. It's going to be a real test for Joseph Parker, but something that he and all of us here are very excited about.
Yeah, ain't that the truth. Thanks, Joe Porter. Joe Porter, our sports reporter from Wellington. Just quickly going into the news, let's have Las Vegas bookmaker Ben Eckstein talking about the odds on who's going to win the Oscars. He told Reuters.
Leo DiCaprio, after getting nominated a handful of times, will win absolutely his first Oscar for The Revenant. There's really no reason to even mention the other guys. DiCaprio is now 1 to 50. So you would have to put up $50 to win back one stinking dollar. It's over. Leo DiCaprio does it. Best Picture, we have The Revenant now has moved into a favorite. It's really a dogfight between The Revenant and Spotlight. We think that The Revenant is going to do it because of the fact that the director just got the nod in Uratu. In the odds-making world, we have Revenant at 1 to 2, which means you would have to put up $2 to win back $1. For Spotlight, we have it at 2 to 1. You put up $1, you get back 2. The Big Short is at 4 to 1, so you put up $1, you get back 4. The rest of the pictures, The Martian, Mad Max, no shot. Don't even bother coming to the show. Best Actress is also done according to our odds, and that's Brie Larson for The Room. It's not as overwhelming a favorite as Leo DiCaprio. She is 1 to 20. For Best Supporting Actor, right now, we have Sylvester Stallone, Rocky, as the favorite, but a slight favorite over Rylance. Now, the reason we updated our odds and made it a little tighter, because Rylance just won the BAFTA. So we made that a little tighter, but still, right now, Stallone is the favorite to win. For Best Supporting Actress, Alicia Vikander is going to be our favorite. This, again, is not a really competitive race. She's kind of out in front, not way, way out in front. It's 1-2 odds. We have the other two girls, Rooney Mara and Kate Winslet, at 7-2. So if there is an upset in this category, I would look for Rooney Mara or Kate Winslet to take it.
The odds for the Oscars, it's 6 o'clock. Kia ora everyone, you are listening to Checkpoint on Radio New Zealand National, RNZ National. I'm John Campbell. However, you are joining us, whether it's online streaming Freeview or on the radio the old-fashioned way. It's great to have you with us. Coming up in the next 30 minutes, Dick Smith has announced it's closing all stores in Australia and New Zealand. Around 430 jobs are to go by the look of things. We're going to talk to the person who has investigated the public floats of Dick Smith. Prior to this, they went from being worth less than $20 million to being worth $500 million. How on earth did that happen? We're going to go live to Fiji and assess the impact of Cyclone Winston on sugar crops up there. And the first of the Syrian refugees arrive in Wellington to start a new life. All that and more coming up in the next 30 minutes. But first, here's the news with Leilani Mamoisia.
Kia ora, good evening. More than 400 Dick Smith workers have lost their jobs. The electronics retailer is closing its shops after the receiver failed to find a buyer for the company. Gareth Thomas reports.
More than 400 stores in Australia and New Zealand have been struggling with too much stock and falling demand. The banks pulled the plug on the company's financing arrangements earlier this year and it went into receivership. Dick Smith has about 60 stores in New Zealand, which are expected to close over the next 2 months. The 430 workers who will lose their jobs are entitled to redundancy payouts of up to about $22,000. The staff are higher up the queue for payments than firms which are owed money by the Dick Smith shops. There was some interest from local and overseas buyers for the stores, but none of their offers convinced the receivers to sell. This is Gareth Thomas.
The jury in the trial of double murder accused Russell Tully has been told he returned to Ashburton to die. The 49-year-old is charged with the murder of Peggy Noble and Lee Cleveland and the attempted murder of two of their colleagues at the Ashburton Work and Income Office in September 2014. Today in the High Court in Christchurch, evidence was heard from the Work and Income Regional Manager Shane Carter, who dealt directly with Mr Tully when he fell out with staff at the Ashburton office. He said Mr Tully made reference to his medical condition and said he'd come back to Ashburton to die. Under cross-examination, Mr Carter was asked if Mr Tully was angry at the system rather than a particular individual. He answered that was a fair assessment. Earlier today, Mr Tully, who is defending himself, was ordered to leave court after an angry outburst. The Fiji government says more than 45,000 people, about 5% of the population, are now in evacuation centres following Cyclone Winston. The death toll stands at 42, but officials expect it to continue to rise. A government spokesperson, Ewan Perrin, says the number of evacuees has jumped as communication is restored to affected areas. The Foreign Minister, Murray McCully, says a major infrastructure rebuild will be needed in Fiji to minimise the cyclone's impact on the economy. He says New Zealand and other aid donors stand ready to provide additional help. Mr McCully says New Zealand has already made more than $3 million worth of aid available and has both aircraft and naval vessels helping. A national domestic abuse charity says a new report calling for more practical help for victims shows the system is in urgent need of an overhaul. A spokeswoman for Shine, Jill Proudfoot, says the organisation supports calls by the Family Violence Death Review Committee for agencies to take more responsibility for ensuring victims' safety. She says it beggars belief that some victims are still being told to keep themselves safe.
I think it comes down to the idea of empowering victims, which is a dangerous concept really, because it's kind of like abandoning them. And when you leave the woman to make all the choices and take all the actions, you're actually saying to her, you're on your own.
Jill Proudfoot says a safety plan needs a coordinated approach that involves everyone taking action to help the family become safe. Housing New Zealand says it's doing everything it can to ensure its homes are warm, safe and dry after a family raised concerns about the dampness of the house they were set to move into. The family of 6 have been offered a 4-bedroom property in West Auckland, nearly 5 years after they first applied for a state house. Earlier today, the family and their housing advocate said the home was damp and a risk to the children who have respiratory illnesses. Their advocate Ian Davies now says he's been to see it and it's not as bad as he thought. A Housing New Zealand spokesperson says they wouldn't move a family into a home in need of repair and maintenance, and repair work has been done. Research shows people are driving their cars more slowly. A Transport Ministry study has found mean speed levels have fallen in the past couple of decades. In 1996, the mean speed on the open road was 102.3 kilometres an hour. In 2015, that fell to 95.7 kilometres an hour. The study found the percentage of drivers exceeding the speed limit has dropped from 56% to 23% in the same period. In the period covered, annual road deaths fell from 514 to 320. To sport, and the trainer of heavyweight Joseph Parker says the New Zealander's next opponent will be by far his toughest yet. Parker will fight the Cameroon-born France-based boxer Carlos Takam, with the winner to get a guaranteed shot at an IBF heavyweight world title. Parker's trainer, Kevin Barry, says the 24-year-old will be sorely tested by Takam. A venue is yet to be confirmed for the fight, which is expected to take place in May. The Crusaders have named several debutants for their Super Rugby opener against the Chiefs in Christchurch on Saturday night, with Tim Boyes having to fill Richie McCaw's boots at open side and Richie Maunga taking over from Dan Carter at first 5. The Crusaders will field an all-black front row and 2 Fijians on the wings, while Kieran Reid packs down at number 8 and lock Sam Whitelock captains the side. The World Cup winning All Black Liam Messam is in line to make his New Zealand Sevens return after being named in the squad for next weekend's next leg of the World Series in the United States. And that's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Colin Thorne, geographer, expert witness. His evidence helped Costa Rica persuade a bunch of international court judges that the San Juan River wasn't where Nicaragua said it was, which meant the border wasn't where they said it was either. A cheaper option than invasion. And this week's Cultural Ambassador Andrew Todd celebrates computer games and how they can improve social skills. On Nights with me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
And Met Service forecast to midnight tomorrow. For all of the North Island, also Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury, fine with areas of cloud. Buller's mostly cloudy, a few showers from tomorrow afternoon. Westland's occasional rain becoming heavy in southwestland tomorrow afternoon. Otago and Southland rain clearing overnight, but scattered falls returning tomorrow afternoon. Fiordland rain with heavy falls easing to showers tomorrow evening, and Chatham Islands cloudy periods. And it's 6:08.
Thank you very much, Leilani. Yes, the sorry saga of electronics retailer Dick Smith. It was in the news. We're going to look at it in greater depth now. It does seem to have come to an end. The receivers this evening announced all standalone Dick Smith stores in New Zealand and Australia will close. That's 62 stores in New Zealand, 301 in Australia. The impact will 430 staff in New Zealand, 2,500 staff in Australia. But how's it come to all this? Matt Ryan is an investment analyst with Forager Funds in Sydney. Now, last October, he wrote an article headlined, "Dick Smith is the greatest private equity heist of all time." Giles Beckford, our business editor, and I were talking about this about half an hour ago. Now we have the author himself, Matt Ryan, on the phone from Sydney. Matt, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
It's really hard not to feel depressed by the kind of cynicism that you identify in what happened to Dick Smith after it was taken over. Can you talk it through what Anchorage Capital did?
Sure. So we sort of queried it when the company first went to float Dick Smith. Anchorage picked up Dick Smith from Woolworths just a year or so earlier and sort of paid really just sort of a pittance for it because the business was well known at the time to have a number of issues. So they picked up the business and sort of they took write-downs before they purchased the business. They took a lot of write-downs to the inventory and a couple of other charges. Then had a big clearance sale and basically used that to kind of fund the rest of the purchase price from Woolworths. And with a couple of sort of tricks, managed to put up a bit of a profit forecast and float the business to $500 million, really having only put about $20 million of their own money into it. It was a business with a lot of issues when they purchased it, and I guess the thing was they sort of they dressed it up like it was a good business with a great growth trajectory, and the share market kind of fell for it. And I think sort of what the last 12 months have kind of proven is that discretionary electronics retail is a very, very tough business, and Dick Smith has sort of been outcompeted here by JB Hi-Fi and others in a difficult industry.
When it was floated for $500 million, $500 million, what's your sense of what it was actually worth at that time, ballpark?
Yeah, it's always sort of a grating estimating value, but I think the number that Woolworths sold it for was $100 million by the time they took their sort of their earn-out payments 12 months later, and I think that's probably sort of around about fair value for a business like that. Certainly $500 million was well in excess of what Dick Smith was worth.
And the initial cash payment of $20 million, and I'm just reading your own work back to you, which I guess is a sincere form of flattery. But as you say, it doesn't even look like they paid that much because they acquired Dick Smith with about $12.5 million cash in the business, right?
Yeah, so most likely they put in about $10 million of their own money and took out, I think, $520 million or something. So it's one of the more spectacular returns I think you'll see in sort of less than a 12-month period.
Wow, it really stops you in your tracks, doesn't it? I mean, you work in this business, and I'm using terms like cynical. Do you feel that way about it?
Yeah, certainly, and I think it's one of those things. I think the role of Anchorage here is an interesting one. We have people sort of call us up and say, what do you think about this? And I think it's an interesting one because, in some senses, this is just business, right? Like it's a seller's job to kind of to sell the business for the best price they can. But then I don't think the actions here are to be applauded either. And I think it's an interesting one in terms of sort of what should have happened and exactly how far you can push the envelope. To make something look good for sale.
Yeah, and so now we have 2,500 staff in Australia and 430 staff in New Zealand almost certainly going to lose their jobs. Does any of the announcement today surprise you, Dick Smith's demise?
I don't think so. I mean, when it went into administration a couple of months back now, I think this kind of looked to me to be the most likely avenue. There was sort of discussions in the paper that they might be able to sell it as a going concern, but it looked like it sort of had all sorts of problems. They'd done a big clearance sale to try and raise some cash. That had fallen over. The banks had sort of obviously lost confidence, and I think it would have surprised me if someone wanted to get in there and try to sort of salvage it and turn it around.
Thank you so much, Matt Ryan, who was an investment analyst with Forager Funds in Sydney. Matt's article came out in October of last year. It's headlined, "Dick Smith is the greatest private equity heist of all time," and you can find it very easily on the internet. If you just Google Dick Smith heist and Matt Ryan, you'll find it. The time on Checkpoint is 13 and a half minutes past 6. Let's return to Fiji. The death toll stands at 42. Among the dead, 3 children. The outer islands are of most concern. Homes, communities and crops simply gone, full stop. Our reporter Alex Perrottet from RNZ International has spent the day travelling around Fiji looking at the damage to crops, and this is really bad news for the country. We'll speak to him in a couple of minutes, but first UNICEF's Joseph Hing. Now, he spent the past 2 days on the devastated Koru Island. That was really cut off after the cyclone. Joseph sent us pictures back and he described how one family in particular has been affected.
After spending around 2 days on the island, one story that left an impression in me was about how this mum, who I met in one of the 4 villages I visited, how she survived the storm while still in her house with her 2 sons. During the cyclone, when the wind started to pick up, she knew that they needed to get to safety, but they couldn't get outside. So she found the safest place in the house, which was their sitting room. They piled up in the corner, and then they just huddled together, hoping that the storm will pass. But as it started to get more stronger, it started to take away parts of the house, bits by bits. The roof went first, then the walls. And it was just her, the 2 sons on the floor with nothing. So the closest thing she could find was a suitcase. She took her 1-year-old son and put him in the suitcase, covered it, and then used her body as a shield. She mentioned she felt tree branches hitting her from the back, wood and other stuff that flew past. She did this to protect both her kids.
That report from Koru. We're going to go to our RNZ International reporter Alex Perrottet, who's been travelling extensively around Fiji's main island, looking at the situation. As well, Alex, is the damage to crops. Alex, how extensive is the crop damage?
Well, John, here in the Western Division, that's Nandi and North, so Lautoka, Ba, Taurua, Raki, where we were yesterday, it's gone. 100% of the crops are gone. That's cassava, papaya, breadfruit, mango, eggplant, all gone. We spoke to Nature's Way. That's a cooperative that helps farmers get crops to export standard and pass quarantine, basically. Very important. He's saying those farmers, but Kyle Stice from Nature's Way, he says the farmers will take a huge confidence hit. And the only consolation really is that they do have preserved seeds and crops in Singatoka. That's on the south coral coast of Viti level. It's less affected, and he's basically saying they'll hopefully, but very slowly, regrow from there.
Yeah, what about the Fiji? What about the Fijian sugar industry, Alex?
Well, that could be gone, John. The president of the Lautoka cane producers says 80% of the crop nationwide is gone, but in the west and the north, it's 100%. So it'll need a $50 million rehabilitation. That's what one political party leader here is saying. Some are saying it's just time to move on to something else. I mean, last year we reported the industry has shrunk 50% in the last 8 years, and they even lack...
Alex, I hope you're still there. I'm just going to say in the west and the north, 100% of sugarcane gone. Obviously, aid is needed both in the short term and in the long term. Is it getting through, Alex?
Well, there's planes and planes of it arriving here, and it's sitting on the tarmac, and there's just a lot of talk about assessments happening. Now, I spoke to UNICEF a short time ago, and they're saying, look, that's normal. There's priorities for the worst hit areas. The Prime Minister, Frank Bainimarama, was in Raki today for a briefing, so at least there's communication and there's talk. But, John, each time these people see an official coming towards them, it's just more and more frustrating that they're bringing a clipboard instead of a tarpaulin or a food package or just bottled water. They could do it in the Yasawas. I flew there 2 days ago to the Yasawa Island group. At least 4 villages there. At least no one died. But at least the resorts, when they go to do assessments, they're taking food, they're taking water, tarpaulins. If they can do it there, the question is, why can't it be done on the mainland? There's plenty of large resorts here in Nandi, and that's what we're trying to find out.
Alex used the word frustration. How apparent is that frustration now?
Well, we see it in some of the people in the evacuation centres. They're all there, and most of them are like schools or community buildings.
They're saying that's the best place to get drinking water. So they're okay, they're surviving there, but it's so indefinite. UNICEF have said basically one positive thing that's happened is that they've been able to ship things to Koru Island, that's the island you just spoke about. They've sent, basically, we saw this in Vanuatu with Cyclone Pam, a school-in-a-box kit. So it comes with a tent, it comes with materials, and so the schools can't be running because they're used as evacuation centres, but the kids can be doing something and get back to classes and have a focus for the next few months. So that's one positive. And UNICEF are saying aid will speed up, but at this time the frustration certainly is evident.
Alex Perrottet from RNZ International. Thank you so much, Alex. Alex is working in Fiji. He is filing for, obviously, all of Radio New Zealand's bulletins. But if you want to see RNZ International's work, which is top-notch, do go to their website. You will find it as part of the overall RNZ site. The first of the Syrian refugees to enter the country under the emergency quota will arrive in Wellington tomorrow to begin their new lives. The emergency intake allows for 600 Syrian refugees over the next 2.5 years. Kate Pereira Garcia has been looking at what life will be like for them.
You've never used an EFTPOS machine, aren't sure where to catch the bus, and don't know the names of most of the products in the supermarket. On top of all of that, everyone speaks in a funny accent in your second or perhaps third language. Wafek Darwish says this is what the refugees arriving tomorrow face, and it was pretty overwhelming when he arrived a year and a half ago as a skilled migrant. Wafek's an IT solution architect who arrived from Syria via Sierra Leone and Dubai after civil war broke out.
You initially don't feel safe and don't feel home until you really settle down and try to make some friends and then try to make some memories, because whenever you try to make some memories around the place you live, then these memories will be good for you, and then your attachment to that place will start, and then you're going to love this place by time. It's going to be your home again.
Wafek's wife and young son joined him 3 months later. Despite leaving a father and 2 sisters in Syria, he says he's lucky because he got a job and speaks English.
Home it's not only the place where you were born, home is also the place where you have been welcomed, provided home and safety for you and your family. So it's definitely New Zealand is a home for me now, and I'm not going to leave it.
Refugee and Victoria University student Daniel Gamboa Salazar knows the extra challenges refugees face. He and his mother are from Colombia and arrived 3.5 years ago after a run-in with armed terrorists and being unwelcome in neighbouring Ecuador.
I always tell people that for us it's double the work, triple the work. Obviously English is not our first language. It was really hard, just the idea of adjusting to New Zealand culture and making friends. Because I come from a different culture, I found sometimes New Zealand people a little bit reserved. It's still hard to make friends.
Daniel says there are special challenges for young refugees.
Obviously, it's easier for young people to learn the language. I have seen how the dynamics change. We see kids taking over their parents because now they have the power, they have learned the language. And so at the schools, they have to translate for their parents. It's a lot of pressure on children as well.
Markway Aiken arrived as a refugee 13 years ago with his aunt and cousins. The actor says it took a while to settle in at school and to adapt to what he calls strange traditions, such as celebrating a birthday and being able to stay put.
I got adapted to changing, like not staying in one country forever. It was always on the back of my mind that I'm not going to stay here longer. We keep moving from Sudan to Kenya and then from Kenya to New Zealand. Something that just got stuck in the back of my head, that wherever I go, I make quick friends and then leave them behind.
Markway's advice for the new arrivals is to find people they can turn to. About 80 Syrians arrived last year under the annual refugee quota and have already settled in Wellington. For Checkpoint, Kate Pereira Garcia.
Coming up on World Watch at 6:30 with John Greaves, calls for a cut in the number of immigrants entering the European Union, 7 people accused of murder. In connection with the collapse of a dam in Brazil, we have breaking news. Police and emergency services are currently attending a fatal crash between a car and a truck on Egmont Street in Patea, South Taranaki, of course. Police say there are currently diversions in place due to the road being closed, and motorists should expect delays when travelling through Patea. There is currently no further information about those involved in the crash. The Prime Minister has been gifted a baby elephant during his visit to Sri Lanka, but not everyone is happy about the jumbo-size present. present. The deed to 5-year-old Nandi was presented by the Sri Lankan president to John Key during a ceremony in Colombo after the signing of an agreement with Auckland Zoo. It's the second elephant gifted to New Zealand by Sri Lanka. An 8-year-old female was flown to Auckland in June. Sagarita Rajakunayaka from the Sri Lankan animal rights group Savra Mitra says many people in the country aren't happy about their elephants being exported.
It's not about New Zealand. Most of all the organizations and many people in Sri Lanka don't like to send away elephants to other countries, especially as gifts of the state, because for one thing, we don't want them to be treated as property, and another thing is they need to stay in this country, their tropical home, where there's water, the proper climate, and other elephants, because they don't like solitary life. And in many other countries, especially countries where there can be extreme cold climate sometimes, we know they do suffer. And they suffer loneliness, so it makes us very sad about it. And we strongly oppose elephants being sent away. That is the position.
There are 2 elephants already at Auckland Zoo. And whilst Auckland is certainly nowhere near as warm as Sri Lanka, it's one of the warmer parts of New Zealand. So does that make you feel somewhat more comfortable about this arrangement?
No, I have to say that we have heard that New Zealand is treating our elephant very well, and we are very grateful for that and very happy. But we are talking on principle, because actually we oppose, as very many people do now in the world, we oppose the concept of zoos, and we oppose the zoos in Sri Lanka too. Because it is very wrong to bring animals, capture them, bring them, and exhibit them, which is putting them to a great deal of suffering and unhappiness.
Sagarika Rajakunayaka from a Sri Lankan animal rights group. And Auckland Zoo says its experts have assessed Nandi and consider her to be of the right temperament to be a great companion for its other elephants, Anjali and Burma. It says in a statement there's still a lot to be worked through before Nandi can come to New Zealand, including routine testing over the coming months. Lots and lots of feedback tonight. Thank you all. Patricia says, sitting in my car listening to Checkpoint and the tale of the mother and suitcase in Fiji crying, how can the average person help? Well, just look up the aid agencies who are working in Fiji. I guess, Patricia, that was a deeply moving story from Koro Island. So much has been lost. Alex Perrottet, who's up there for Radio New Zealand International, saying 100% of the sugar crops lost in some of the regions. 70% of other major horticultural crops are gone. A major search is underway for an 11-year-old girl missing in Gisborne Harbour. This has just come in. She was gathering mussels at the mouth of Turanginui River. Her friend came ashore to tell people her mate had disappeared. That's just come in from Gisborne at the river mouth there, and part of State Highway 1 in North Otago has been closed due to a fatal crash. Gosh, the New Zealand Transport Agency says State Highway 1 near Hampton, south of Oamaru, will be closed until about 7 o'clock this evening. It's 30 minutes away. There are no detours available, so motorists are advised to postpone any journeys through Hampton until after 7, maybe a bit later. The police and emergency services are at the scene of the crash, which happened just before 2:45 today. A police spokesperson says the motorcyclist died and the driver of the other vehicle is being treated by ambulance staff. The Katruda interview, the people lobbying. So there's a petition being presented on the steps of Parliament on Tuesday. Lots of response to that interview. Let's put up the money going to change the flag into these drugs. My brother is getting Katruda for a lung and prostate cancer in Auckland. In Australia, it's $3,000 a month on a private scheme. It's free for him. Yes, in Australia it is publicly funded. It's being used in the treatment of metastasized cancer, typically from melanoma. But this is part of the immunotherapy research where the drugs encourage the body's own immune system to fight them, and they're now being increasingly widely used in metastasized cancers. John, just listening to your program regarding melanoma medication, how much is our unwanted flag referendum costing us, Bruce? So cancer drug or new flag, no-brainer to me. Lots of people with this theme. Hi John, how can we sign this petition please? I've had a melanoma removed. I was lucky. Teresa. Dawn says, well done to both Lisa Renwick and the other patient. That was Jeff, the 22-year-old master's student and architect. The drug should be funded. Those people have a right to treatment to live. And finally, if John Key can find dollars for flag referendum, surely he can find dollars for melanoma without other health issues being underfunded. A couple of people have said, hey, where was the science? Where was the discussion about what wouldn't have to be funded if Keytruda was funded by Pharmac? Well, they're very good questions. We're trying desperately hard to put them to the Minister, who isn't available. But Pharmac are fronting to discuss exactly those issues. How might the cake be reallocated? Is it money well spent to fund Keytruda? Do they have the money to do so? Or would they had to go back to the government? So all of that will be discussed on Checkpoint tomorrow night. That is Checkpoint for tonight, though. Thank you for your feedback. Thank you for listening or watching. However you're with us, we appreciate your company. We hope to see you or speak to you again tomorrow night at 5.
To RNZ National, where it's 6:30. Welcome to World Watch PM. I'm John Greaves. Tonight, help arrives for some in a besieged part of Syria. A stunning victory for Donald Trump in the American presidential race. And convictions for brutal crimes that shocked Britain. That and more in World Watch PM. The United Nations has carried out its first aid drop to a besieged part of eastern Syria. But UN officials say they're still being denied access to other parts of the country where civilians are trapped by fighting. And they're again asking the Syrian government to approve more than 40 outstanding requests for aid deliveries. Here's the ABC's